main discussion we've got on the show today is about the number of left groups that we have out there. We've got Enough is Enough have just emerged. So the Unite for Workers Economy, Don't Pay is out there, and also we've had for quite some time People's Assembly. Now, it's quite confusing about why we have so many groups, and I was alerted to the idea, the actual question of this by a post on Facebook from John Rees, who is who I've known from Stop the War, and he's also in the People's Assembly. I'm just John's on the call. How are you doing, John?
Good, Chrisman. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for coming on.
Very welcome.
Now, I mean, it's a bit of a mess, isn't it? Having 4 groups that are all kind of working on the energy crisis to oppose the government and Labour's lack of lack of initiative on this. What's the, not having that unity, does that have a dangerous effect on our chances of doing anything?
Well, I think it's understandable that that a number of groups, those you mentioned, and probably a great deal of others as well, are very, very concerned with what is the single biggest attack on working class living standards since the 1930s. It would be unsurprising, and indeed it would be undesirable, if there hadn't been a kind of mushrooming of people wanting to do things, and that's a positive. And the Enough is Enough meetings have been very big rallies, and that's, everybody's enormously glad to see that. A lot of people have signed up to the Don't Pay campaign. Very glad to see that. But I think that if over time, and hopefully not that much time, we don't work out a way of systematically cooperating and combining on big mobilizations, we will be the weaker for it, for the very obvious and one of the oldest adages in the working class movement: unity is strength. We don't want what is a very centralized operation against our living standards, led by the government, defended by the government, forced through by corporations that are not only national but international. It's obvious that in the face of that kind of concerted attack, you don't have the maximum possible unity on our side. We're weaker for it. It's not a complex argument. It's not a new argument, but it is a true argument.
Mm. Now, but is there any sort of historical parallels that you could, because you're a historian as well, I mean, have we seen failures to unite actually lead to problems in the past where, it could have had a different result?
Yeah, I think everybody knows that we're weaker until we create the broadest possible umbrella. I mean, you only have to, instead of thinking back over our failures, let's just think back over our successes. If there hadn't been the kind of overarching umbrella of the Anti-Nazi League in terms of fighting the Nazis, we would have been a lot weaker, and possibly they wouldn't have been defeated if there hadn't been a national umbrella over the poll tax campaign. There would have still been people doing things, but it wouldn't have been as effective. It wouldn't have perhaps called those national demonstrations, which were very, very important, alongside the people not paying the tax itself. We know from our experience with Stop the War, it wasn't that there weren't lots of people who wanted to oppose the Iraq and Afghan wars, but it was very important that we pulled everybody together: Quakers, the Muslim community, the trade unions, socialist left, all in one national campaign that could mobilize on an unprecedented scale. So I think from our own experience of mass movements, we know that unity is a desirable and effective tool in the struggle. It's a very old story.
Yeah, I mean, I put a survey out about this issue, and the results are, I mean, this is one of the results that was quite noticeable. 80% were in Enough is Enough, 15% were in Don't Pay, 36 People's Assembly, and 4% in Unite for Workers Economy. There were some comments on the survey about People's Assembly not starting off really well at its formation and building a lot, but then it's kind of petered out. Its energy kind of petered out. Do you think that Jeremy Corbyn's campaign and momentum sort of deflected away from People's Assembly and has confused? Has that been an aspect of why there's been these kind of groups coming up?
Well, I certainly think that, I mean, and I think this was true not just of the People's Assembly, but of Stop the War and all the social movements, really. There was a moment there where suddenly, when Jeremy was on the ballot paper for leader, people thought, okay, look, we've done a lot of protesting. We've done a lot of protesting about what we're against. Here's an opportunity to get somebody into government, possibly, who can implement a program that we're for. And I think a lot of the energy of the social movements, I think a lot of the dynamism of the Corbyn campaign came from people who'd been in the social movements or influenced by the social movements, who poured into the Labour Party in unprecedented numbers to try and advance that cause as far as they could. And I don't think that was to the detriment of the situation politically. I think that popularised the debate about socialism on a scale that wouldn't have happened if that hadn't have been the case. So I don't. As a social movement activist and as somebody who didn't join the Labour Party, I don't regret that development, but I do think that there was a downside to it as well, which we've now got to kind of rebuild and repair, really. Yeah. And I think a lot of people who went through the Corbyn experience, I think they're very glad to see the strikes and to see the protest movements, because I think they felt that there hasn't been a proper political home or a project that they felt committed to or worthwhile investing time in until this happened. So I think, in a kind of what goes around comes around kind of way, I think we're back to a moment of building social movements, perhaps with many of the people who were involved in Corbynism and didn't see that as the main priority for a few years.
Yeah, I mean, another result of the survey was one which says, do you think it was a good idea to set up Enough is Enough when the People's Assembly is already campaigning on similar issues? 69% said yes. So, I mean, there does seem to be support for Enough is Enough.
Yeah, and I welcome that. I mean, what's happened? I mean, let's just sort of talk about what Enough is Enough is. I mean, it comes from a moment where for the first time since probably the pensions dispute over a decade ago, the trade union leadership have made decisive moves, or some of them have made decisive moves about campaigning around the cost of living crisis. So we had the TUC demonstration in the same week as the first RMT strikes, and I think that kicked off the current round of sort of mass activity around the cost of living. So that's very welcome. And Enough is Enough is a specific initiative by the CWU, by the Postal Workers leadership. Now, I absolutely don't have a problem with that. In fact, my view is that they should have done this long ago. I mean, lots of the unions gave some support to the People's Assembly, but I think they've redoubled that kind of effort, or at least the CWU has made a new kind of burst of initiative with the RMT around Enough is Enough. So I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem with that. I just think there needs to be cooperation. So I mean, we've got the People's Assembly has got a protest outside the Tory Party conference coming up, and a national demonstration coming up. I want Enough is Enough to support those, to be on the platform, to speak at them. I want the Don't Pay campaign to do that as well. We set up the People's Assembly as an umbrella organisation, and we welcome more people coming under it, or if they don't want to come under it, just to cooperate in terms of the activity. That's the most basic level of unity that we can have. It would be, I think, a very serious weakness if everybody doesn't pile in behind the national demonstration and behind those kind of initiatives, just as we've supported the Day of Action called on the 1st of October. I think we've got to get back to basics. When somebody calls an action, other people in the same field should support it.
Right. I mean, I wasn't trying to prompt that from you, but your Facebook post wasn't relating to they're not supporting that action. So just to let people know that. Paula Peters is on the call as well. And Paula, are you there?
Good morning, Crispin, and good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Paula, you spoke on a show a few weeks ago about your concerns about Enough is Enough because they were not inclusive in the way they were doing things. Do you still feel that's the case? Have they got back to you about any of the things you spoke about then?
I think it's really, I'm going to echo some of John's comments. on the wider left, I think what's so important now is unity and solidarity and showing support to one another's campaigns. And I need to raise the term working people, you know, and I feel that is very excluding to a majority of people on the left who are campaigning on wider issues, who are not, you know, the narrative I think needs addressing on a wider issue, because, you know, we've got Unite who using the workers' economy. Now, I know trade unions are for working people, but Unite has Unite Community, and I'm a Unite Community member, and right now Unite Community members are feeling a bit excluded out of the narrative. Unite Community support industrial members on a wide and brought, you know, strike action and campaigns and everything. But, you know, Sharon's manifesto talked about community campaigns and building campaigns out in the community. And I think that solidarity needs to be built from industrial members to Unite Community. We often hear from industrial members, you know, oh, what, you know, why Unite Community here, and, you know, what's the relevance? Well, there is a relevance for us to be in the union, and, you know, we're glad that we're there. But I do think that narrative needs to be looked at. Now, from a disabled person's perspective, from Enough is Enough, I haven't seen much mention, if hardly anything, on disabled people and the issues that we're experiencing. For disabled people, you know, for the last 12 years, we have been at the sharp end of austerity, the sharp end of the pandemic, and now the sharp end of the cost of living crisis. And it's got to be said time and again, I've said this very clearly, that the cost of living crisis isn't new. Year on year, we've seen prices rising, and disabled people right now are in debt to energy companies, as many low-income workers are, and older people are. We've seen the triple lock, you know, abolished by Boris Johnson, and Liz Truss, it's got to be said, that she is looking at abolishing the triple lock completely with the state pension and watering the state pension down. And if you've seen Liz Truss's, you know, what she's promising, she wants to shrink the state. You know, that's going to impact on a great many of us going forwards. Now, you know, DPAC have a seat on the National Committee of the People's Assembly. We support the People's Assembly from 2013. We still continue to do. We are calling for people to join the Tory Party conference action that the People's Assembly are having on the 2nd of October. We are asking people to join the national demonstration on the 5th of November on the cost of living that People's Assembly are having. But we're also asking people to support the protests that are happening on the 1st of October, that Enough is Enough are happening. You know, and there is a broad, and the Fuel Poverty Action Group, there's a wide umbrella of energy crisis groups and everything who are fighting back against fuel poverty right now, who've set up national demonstrations across the country. But what we are saying is it is massively important to include disabled people in the narrative. It's important to include older people in the narrative. It's important to include retired members at Unite in the narrative who are also feeling a bit out of the conversation at the moment and feeling a tad disappointed, you know. And it's got to be said time and again, and it's never talked about apart from us, it feels, you know. And let's be clear on this point, you know, that disabled people have been dying for the past 12 years with austerity, with benefit cuts, with cuts to personal independence payments, with social care cuts, with cuts to ESA. You know, we've seen in the past 9 months an explosion of benefit sanctions with universal credit claimants. And it doesn't feel that universal credit claimants are included in this narrative right now. And we are seeing the stepping up of the managed migration to universal credit. And we're still fighting for the uplift to be made permanent. Just recently, DPAC have supported the Good Law Project in the legal challenge against Ofgem, in the fact that they didn't carry out an impact assessment on the impact of the energy price rises on disabled people's lives. So we're calling for disabled people to share their stories and how they've been impacted on the cost of living, but the energy prices, because disabled people are severely impacted with, you know, high energy users with using medical equipment, you know, peg feeding, you know, using the washing machine several times to wash soil bedding and clothing. And, you know, when you're seeing with Liz Truss, with the energy cap, you know, with disabled people of high energy users are going to be paying way over that. And, you know, what we're seeing when we saw with the work and pensions report that, you know, has been tweeted yesterday, the DWP are not increasing, you know, benefit rates with the cost of living at the moment. And that is having a devastating impact on disabled people and older people's lives, you know, where the state pension and benefits only went up by 3.1% in April. And inflation, you know, they're talking about 22.4% probably in January. It's having devastating impacts now. And we're saying to enough is enough. And we're saying to the wider left, you know, disabled people are impacted by, you know, we've got disabled asylum seekers in detention centres right now. Include us in that narrative. You know, we are, you know, dying by energy costs. Include us in that narrative. You know, we're being impacted by sanctions. Include us in that narrative. And the wider net left has this dreadful habit of not talking to each other, replicating campaigns, and it all falls to bits.
So I just want to, can I just say that People's Assembly is inclusive in that regard. So if there were some collaboration between Enough is Enough and People's Assembly, that would be a step in the right direction, wouldn't it?
Yeah, they've got to start talking to one another, you know. But I think Enough is Enough definitely has to reach out to as many groups and organisations as possible to build the collaboration and be, I think, inclusive in the rallies and the platforms. And disabled people, older people need to be more included in that narrative. And, you know, I think solidarity to our campaigns as well. When DPAC are out on the street and the campaigns, and when we launch stuff on the website, we would like to see a broader solidarity to our campaigns, which I've got to say, Rees, you know, the last several years that hasn't been happening. And it's been a constant fight to get disabled people onto platforms and included in the narrative. And that should not be the case. And I'd like to see that change going forwards, definitely. But also, I'll end on this. I was very disappointed to see in Skwawkbox article saying that Enough is Enough is the only campaign in town. It isn't. But also, you know, you see People's Assembly and you see London Renters Union are doing great work around anti-evictions. You know, Unite Community are doing great stuff right now, have been since its conception. DPAC are doing stuff. You know, there's White Extinction Rebellion are doing stuff. There are many groups who are doing great stuff, and that should be recognised now. But I will end on this. We should never, ever, ever forget the last 12 years of resistance. You know, we would be in a very different place right now if we hadn't have mounted the campaigns that we have in the past 12 years. That's really important to stress, that we recognise that, and we also recognise the people that we've lost along the way, great campaigners who are no longer with us today. You know,
I can see. So I can see how Enough is Enough sounds like it's saying not much has been done already by the way it's wording itself as well. I've just got to move on to Steve Walker from Skwawkbox, who you just mentioned. Not trying to promote a row or anything. Steve, you've written an article. There was an article about Sharon Graham's new group that you wrote. I think it all was in. I don't know if you wrote it, but it's in Skwawkbox. You're making that point as well, that there are too many groups doing the same thing. What do you think the debate? Why do you think there are so many groups at the same time?
Well, human psychology is a complicated thing. I think there's a lot of reasons behind it. I mean, in some cases, I think vanity. In some cases, I think you know, kind of a particular focus on a particular issue that people aren't prepared to kind of defocus for the time being in order to concentrate on a wider issue. I mean, I'll just come back on Paula's comment there about saying it's the only show in town. I think in terms of actually making the public impact and unsettling the establishment, you've maybe got some of the environmental campaigns and stuff like that are causing an inconvenience as well. But the primary thing that's really rattling people at the moment is the Enough is Enough campaign, and I have issues with it that I don't think it's demanding enough. But it's there and making an impact at the moment. I think that's you push behind the point that's kind of making the sharpest dig into the edifice you're trying to bring down. Really, I guess is the point I'm trying.
Do you think? Do you think Enough is Enough were ready for the response that they got? I mean, the 500,000. I don't believe they could have thought they'd get that many people behind it. I mean, do you think they could have worked a bit more on how they work with other groups before launching, or they just didn't expect it, so they couldn't really have anticipated it?
As well, I mean, it's obviously the moment for that kind of show of unity and that kind of show of strength of people working together, I guess, is the thing. Certainly from a union perspective, I think that any union that wants to serve its members properly should be adding their weight behind that, because it's the main thing going on in the union movement. I think it's daft to start trying to set up alternative structures and kind of movements to that, as happened with Uniting Scotland, for example, when and say that you're not going to give any practical support to the one that's already got huge momentum. I think the trouble is in the construction of it. You see, I mean, if when you set something up, you don't approach the biggest union in the country, or one of the biggest unions in the country, you can't expect them just to say, "Oh, shucks, all right." I mean, that isn't how serious politics works. I mean, the Unite National Executive this week refused to back Enough is Enough because they couldn't see a democratic structure in it, and they weren't approached about it. Now, well, let's be clear on that, though, John. They didn't say it was because they couldn't see a democratic structure in it. They said it's because Unite's job now is to.
Well, that's what the people on the executive. That's what people on the executive are saying to me.
Their official statement to me was that they wish Enough is Enough well, but Unite's focus is on industrial action in the workplace.
Yeah, but I think we can all see. I think we can all see what the problem is there. There wasn't enough done to include one of the biggest unions in the country. Now that's a tactical error.
I think if you're going to set something
and also
up
you have to. It's not really a question of personalities. It's a particular political project. So it deliberately didn't include anybody from the revolutionary left, the Communist Party, or anybody from the Corbyn movement. Now, I've got no problem with Andy Burnham, who ran against Jeremy Corbyn, being on the platform of the Enough is Enough in Manchester. I think that's a good thing. But I also think that people from the far left, like Alex Gordon from the RMT, or like Jeremy Corbyn, ought to be on those platforms together. So my vision of a movement is one that stretches right from the revolutionary left, right the way through to people like Andy Burnham, or people, actually, if GMB and Unison could overcome their current stances and join in as well, I'd be absolutely in favour of that. What I think is less effective is if you deliberately launch something on a limited basis and exclude certain sections of the political spectrum, and indeed certain rather large parts of the union movement. That the initial success, I think, is down to the atmosphere created by the strikes. Actually, it's not just an outpouring about the cost of living crisis, it's an outpouring of hope, because the strikes look as if they're taking the battle to the government. But that can be, believe me, I've organised enough of them. Rallies that big can come and they can go. The trick is sustaining it.
Right.
Paula,
Steve, I've been told. So I've just been told I'm not chairing I'm not chairing the meet. I wasn't anticipating a to and fro, but it's interesting. Steve, do you want to come in, and then Paula, and then I'm going to.
Well, I'll let Paula go first if she wants, and then I'll say my bit.
I'm going to start on this point actually. Going to Steve. Okay. Now, disabled people are giving headaches to the government at the moment with the legal challenges they're mounting, and they're really important. Ofgem being one. and also the legacy benefit court case, which is going ahead in December with the appeal around the 4th of December. And I think that's really important. The DWP hate us, and actually the former Prime Minister actually said, who is he frightened of, you know, when it comes to protesting, and he actually said it was disabled people. And the fact is, DPAC do really punch above its weight on many spectrums, and hence the criticism we often get for the action that we take, and we're looking at the response to the anti-protest laws and how to keep disabled people safe when we do hit out on the streets. But let's be clear on this. We've had 2 years of the pandemic. Many have been shielding, and that's put a hiatus on a lot of campaigning work. Doesn't mean to say that nothing's been happening behind the scenes, because it has. And we've been doing a lot of campaigning behind the scenes, and, working pretty tirelessly, actually. I think, but the thing is, what's been great about DPAC is the solidarity we consistently show to the trade unions and to the wider left, in that the fact is, what the RMT are doing. I've been on 8 picket lines with them recently. I've supported the, Keep the Guard on the Train campaign back in 2016, DPAC has, because cuts to ticket office, the closure of ticket offices, the removal of critically safety trained staff has a horrendous impact on disabled people being able to travel completely, unable to access the station. And ticket office ticket offices give a wide range of services, from journey planning to helping with access to, with tourists whose English isn't their first language. And also ticket offices, give brilliant, cut the deals on the track, give better price for tickets, give better prices than what Trainline or anything done. And a lot of disabled people cannot access computers or apps, and don't have the technology or access needs to use them, and it's excluding. But also, I think it's important, why aren't we asking this question? We're saying Unite is the biggest union. It actually isn't, it's Unison. So why aren't we having this question with Unison and GMB and other trade unions on the left about enough is enough? I think, you need to ask that question to them as well, not just Unite, and what Unison and GMB's position is with enough is enough. And I think it's but I still reiterate here that unity is so important, solidarity is so important. But what disabled people have done in the past 12 years and what it continues to do should never, ever be overlooked. Because, we have had an impact on policy. If it wasn't for groups like Sheffield DPAC and, Manchester DPAC and, other groups within our own organisation, audio recording for PIP assessments and ESA assessments, which is now a standard, wouldn't have happened without the On the Record campaign, and that should be noted. But also all the, highlighting the benefit deaths, highlighting winter fuel poverty deaths and everything is so vitally important. That back in 2018, winter fuel deaths were the highest they've ever been, and we should, on the wider left, we have to make sure that the amount of people who've died as a result of austerity and of the pandemic, and now with the cost of living, is never, ever forgotten. But this is a message to everybody out there, right? You've got to unite. You've got to show solidarity to one another's campaigns. Stop all this ego crap and all the rest of it. Start uniting together, fighting together. We are seriously fucked if we don't. Because this government, believe you me, are not messing around. They are not messing around. This is the final end of the state in their eyes, and they're determined to push it through. So enough is enough of, exclusion. Enough is enough of, discrimination. Enough is enough of, this group won't work with that group. We've got to find a way to work together, but we've also got to find a way to change this narrative, because working people just doesn't fit everybody. We're in a massive struggle, societal struggle to survive here now. That's important to stress.
Okay, but thank you, Paula. Steve, it's quite a lot for you to respond to there, but
well, I'll just say first off, I agree with the vast majority of what Paula said. I've supported DPAC and tried my best to publicise what they're doing, etc. Across the years as they've done that, because for a long time they have been one of the few voices that have been, making an effective noise about it. So, you know, nothing that I've said is in disrespect to what people have done or what people continue to do now. It's, you know, but there is one big public thing going on at the minute, and that's the things with the strikes. I'm excited about what was trailed at the launch event in Liverpool last week before, where they said there's going to be a way for people who are not in unions or not in the workplace to be able to, you know, play their part in that movement as well. And I think that's vital to do, because it's, you know, it can't be just, it's got to be about the class, not about just people who happen to be in a job at any given time. I think it's pretty obvious why I presume others are not talking about Unison and GMB and you know, the shop workers union and the rest of it, USDO, not getting on board with this movement is because who expects them to? You know, they're run by right wingers. They're not going to get involved in something that's really going to threaten to rattle cages and upset apple carts. So, you know, it's pointless talking about why they're not doing it, because, you know, they never, while the people who are in charge in those are in charge in those, it's highly unlikely they're ever, except maybe on a hyper one in Wigan, it's got somebody from Unison speaking at it. You know, so that's the point. But, you know, I think you would have hoped for better from Unite. I'm not sure I did, sadly, but you know, on previous performance, would have hoped that Unite would do better. And you know, for at least the union movement not to get behind this, I think is, you know, it's all part of this thing that there's an idea that you can best serve your union members as a management by either the kind of transactional approach that the right-wing unions take, or by the let's not get involved in the wider political scene approach that seems to be Sharon Graham's unique selling point. Because if you're not trying to influence the wider political situation and you're limiting your thing just to the workplace and just to the, you know, the disputes, then there's laws going to get passed above your head that will prevent you from doing any of those things effectively either. So, you know, it's just extremely short-sighted, I think, you know. So I'm, you know, when I'm talking about the only show in town, I'm talking about at the union level, really. And I think on John's point, my impression, and just I've got no gong to bang in any sense for the Enough is Enough movement. I've had no part in organising it. I'm promoting it because I think it's an opportunity for hope, as somebody mentioned. Somebody saying my sound's distorted.
Sounds all right to me. Sounds all right.
Right, okay. You know, so I'm not coming at this with any kind of agenda, because I don't, you know, it's of no benefit to me, and I have no horse in that race in terms of I wasn't organising. But I don't get the impression that it was a movement that everybody sat down and thought, let's organise this mass movement thing that's going to go really popular, and we really ought to involve Unite and the other unions, but we're not going to bother doing that. It started off as a very limited thing, and essentially the RMT and then the CWU jumped on board with it as well, that developed its own momentum. So I don't think you can really criticise people for not consulting with other unions about what they were going to do, because they didn't do it expecting it to be that big beyond, you know, right, their own personal or sort of union disputes that they were involved in. It just happened that everybody got stuck in because, you know, they all saw it as being a chance to take it to the government. Okay, but, and if the union, you know, the other unions are too proud or whatever to you know, to recognise that happened, and then just think, well, you know what, this is what's happening now, we're going to get on board with it, then I think they do a disservice to the movement. Right.
Well, I'm just aware of the time. Thank you, Steve, for coming on. Thank you, Paula and John. I just want to say something about the groups. I've contacted Don't Pay, Enough is Enough, Unite initiative, not a word back. I chased them up, will they come on the show? Not a word back. It's not I mean, they may well be busy because we're all mourning, but I haven't received anything, which doesn't seem to me to be very good. But and a discussion is useful, I think, on this. And you know, maybe where we are isn't ideal, but we can always change that as we go on, but only through discussing it. And also the survey that we put out shows that 82% think we'd benefit from uniting the four groups. So it's not just that, you know, everyone agrees on this, really. So I think it'd be good if we got people together. And to talk about this is someone who actually managed to get people together in Ireland for the campaign against the water rates. Brendan, are you there?
Good morning, Crispin. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So, how does it feel not being part of this country sort of bickering between groups? But do you look on and think, oh, that's quite entertaining, or do you think, oh, this reminds me of what it was like in Ireland before the water rates campaign? Is there any parallels there?
The comrades can rest assured that bickering on the left is international, Crispin. It's not a UK phenomenon by any means. It's interesting to hear the different campaigns there, and what strikes me about it is that first of all, political sectarianism, it strikes me, is as big an enemy of the working class as neoliberal greed is. It's our failure to come together which keeps them in power. And that's the sad history of certainly the Irish left in a century this year, actually, since we got independence. How independent we are in the European Union is a debate you guys have had and we can have, but you know, we've never had a left government. We've had plenty of leftists, and we have plenty of leftists fighting and arguing with each other. And our history shows us that it's when those people come together, the rare events that those people come together, that we succeed. And when we remain in our sectarian silos, talking at each other instead of to each other, we fail. And just in the last decade, there are 3 examples. 2 social campaigns. The campaign around marriage equality, the campaign around the repeal of the 8th Amendment here, which was about a woman's bodily autonomy, and the water charges campaign you refer to, were 3 times in the last decade when there was broad consensus on a campaign model, a progressive campaign model. And because there was broad consensus and buy-in of all of the left and reaching into the center, those campaigns won, and those campaigns won convincingly. The 2 referendums were won by 2/3 of the voters, and the water charges campaign was won spectacularly, and it lasted 5 or 6 years. Unfortunately, it hasn't been built on. The sectarianism, the sectarian impulse, comes back. And one of the questions that I used to ask and still do ask in the water charges movement is, do you want to be a big part of something small, or are you happy to be a small part of something big? Because it strikes me that while we on the left, be that in our parties or in our campaigns or in our in our unions or whatever we are happy to be big parts of something small, then small we will be, and persecuted we will be. But when we put our own expertise into the pot and take our own specific interests, I'm trying to be kind here, out of it, and work together, be a small part of something big, this class can still win. This class does win. The majority of people are being affected by what you call the cost of living crisis, what I like to call the cost of corporate greed crisis. It affects the majority of people. It affects those who are on low and medium incomes more, but it does affect the majority of people. And what's necessary is to come up with a language, to come up with a campaign model, and to be inclusive and bring the majority of people in. It's not rocket science, but it's very hard to do because the impulse is always to have fractious debates, to argue things to the point of difference rather than discuss them to the point of agreement. And sure, all we're doing is helping the right. All we're doing is helping people like Liz Truss or people like Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil here in Ireland. So it's not that we on the left don't know how to win. We have won. We have the models that won. We can easily compare why we won and why we lost. And we win when we come together. We lose when we don't. It's very, very simple.